First of all, Baba Zayid, I am so excited to be in conversation with you today as we recognize the fifth anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And before we get into conversation, I do think it's important for us just to take a moment, just a moment to sit with the grief, the recognition that while his name has become synonymous with a movement, he was a man, he was a father, he was a brother, he was a son, and that family is still feeling that loss every single day of not having him here. We also know that his death was not an anomaly. He was one of more than 1,100 people who lost their lives at the hands of police that year. Unfortunately, we know that number has gone up every year since, with last year more than 1,300 people being killed at the hands of police. And we're just in a very different time. And so I'm personally excited to be able to have this conversation with you because you are one of the most incredible historians I've ever come across. You have an encyclopedic knowledge of our history. And when you combine that with your deep activism and deep love of our people, you are a very special person. So I'm grateful to be able to be in this fight with you and then to be in conversation today. So I'll let you start.
Well, first, let me just in response to that, let me just say how humbled I am just for the consideration. When you get to be my age and up, folks kind of move you aside or wait for you to step aside. uh, it is an important conversation. I'm honored to be with you
You.
and who you are and what you've done and what you do, what you bring to all the spaces that we share. I'm proud to call you my leader, right? And we both come from spaces that absolutely inform what it is our people need to see, know, and do in order to respond to the challenges of this time. So I just
Yes.
wanted to make sure that this conversation has some balance, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I do want to start right there with history, um, and just reflecting on, 5 years ago when we were in the midst of COVID and we were forced to pause and watch as the police, this former officer Chauvin, so callously, so casually, with his hand in his pocket, and for such an extended period of time, took George Floyd's life. Uh, this is not new. And when we put it in the confines of our total history, just talk a little bit about, how this is just one example of what we face in systemic racism, especially when it comes to the force from policing.
We don't have a lot of time, but in the short few moments that we do have, several things should be said in the before and after of just what happened. This was building, meaning our response, our community's response to what happened to that young man was building. It was an accumulation of these kind of terrors and this kind of abuse that came to a head with this young man's killing. And I would say for several reasons. One, because it was a spectacle killing.
Mm,
It was a spectacle. And Derek Chauvin made a point to show off
mm,
the height of arrogance and privilege. The fact that had every reason to believe that he was going to get away with what he did because he had a history
mhm.
of doing things like that before and had gotten away with some of all of that. If civilian oversight and police accountability was where it ought to be in this country, that young man would still be here. But
Yes.
unfortunately, that's not the case. Uh, it's not an accident of history, I would dare say, that it took place on May 25th, which happens to be African Liberation Day, right?
Mm,
And I'm saying that to shift to how the world as we knew it responded. It
mhm.
wasn't just our hoods
Yeah.
and our kids
Yeah.
and our social justice champions. The global black world and all of our friends and allies turned up in historic dimensions. We're in the midst of observing Malcolm's centennial. And I did a conversation in Newark a couple of days ago where I made a point to show Felonious Floyd, this is George's baby brother, who addressed the United Nations around what happened to his brother, the police response to protests, and the aftermath of what happened to his brother, and why that was important. Of course, that was Malcolm's ghost guiding us, because Malcolm brought us into the international arena at the height of the Black Liberation Movement, like none other. And a lot of us are there on a number of issues, but most especially on police accountability and on reparations, that colossal crime that we have yet to get any redress for. And I'm glad that this organization is a part of multiracial spaces that are now in that conversation. So all of those things need to be appreciated. Quiet as it's kept, there's a book out on George Floyd. Two young Black journalists did a book. His name is George Floyd, that looked at George, the whole human being, all of his love, all of his personality, all of his mistakes, all of his challenges. And he had some. He was a brother who didn't get that break that everybody thought that he would get because, and this is another point about his particular killing and his being abused. He was a big brother, 6'6", all African, right? And in the obsession of the pathology of white racism, there's always been this historic obsession with our bodies, the way both genders of our ancestors were violated. In obsession with our bodies is something that persists in this kind of abuse, right? George, when he was approached, when he was handcuffed, no resistance. He was like, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry. I mean, if you look at the totality of that arrest, it absolutely did not merit him even being taken down to the ground the way Chauvin ultimately did. But he did that representing the worst in racialized policing that this country has and continues to stalk us the way that seemed to haunt so many of us. So the spectacle character of it, the fact that he was a large brother. We have a partner, a cherished partner in Tulsa, the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, right? And we love my Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, cherish her, right? Her brother went through the same thing. Terrence was a big brother, totally surrendered, hands up, don't shoot, and surrounded, helicopter cover, all of that. And they fired on him anyway. And you could hear them in their comments talking, that's a big guy, Come on.
Right. I think
That obsession, not just with our Blackness, but with our physicality, right? It's just, I could go on and I'm trying to keep from choking and getting choked up because it just gets you like that. It just really just gets you like that. For all of those facts, I need to say this. On a spiritual front, someone has traced George's family back to the Benin area of West Africa. He was a Folade, right? Which is corrupted in captivity to Floyd, right? And his people who believe that they are related to him were doing major ceremonies and treatments and uplifting him in the spiritual way of our ancestors in those places from whence we came before we were brought here in captivity. All of those things are wrapped up in how we lost this man. And of course, our protests gave America its largest protest summer in its history. Largest. Those are our kids and our grandkids out there that did that, right? And they were not alone. I'm in Jersey. Though I live in a majority Black community, most of the George Floyd protests that I was asked to come to were majority white in the burbs. And that's the thing that has this particular administration and that wave of racist and fascist and sexist whiteness wanting to ban education because they are afraid of their own children being educated out of their racism. This would be a very different country, very different world if that were to happen.
There are just a couple things I want to pick up on in what you shared. When you're talking about him being 6 feet 6 inches tall, also with Terrence Crutcher also being, just a man of height and size, and that just the physical, just them being tall, that's how they're born. They're just tall men, but that the threat and that's being attached to that, the dangerousness, the violence that's just assumed to come with black skin, particularly when we're talking about black men, is something. And I'm a person who, in my prior career as a prosecutor years ago, I had to train police. And often what you hear in police trainings is, regardless of all of this, what we want is for you to come home at night, come home to your families at night. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all want that. We don't want anybody losing their lives unnecessarily. But when that is the mindset in which you unleash people without addressing the underlying bias and assumptions you make when you're out on the street and you encounter a black man and what you see is potential for violence and danger, that mindset of, well, I'm going to go home. I don't know if everybody else will go home, but I'm going to go home, is something we need to talk more about. We need to talk more about. And then, as you were talking about the spectacle and not being afraid, he saw the cameras
Yes, he
recording.
did.
It didn't
Yes, he
bother
did.
him one bit. He heard the pleading, of George Floyd as
Mama.
right, pleading. We have to connect it to, there is no way in his mind that he understood the person whose neck he had his knee on to be a human being worthy of dignity, that had worth. There's no way. People get arrested for treating pets any kind of way. We treat animals better than what how George Floyd was treated that day. And so that dehumanization can't be left unsaid. And that direct connection of dehumanization to our legacy of slavery cannot be left unsaid. So there's so much in our history that is tied to what brought us to that moment on May 25th, 5 years ago. Yeah.
Well, well, and then of course here we are 5 years later, and as bad as things were then, and Mr. Trump was had his foot on the pedal back then, right?
Yeah.
This is our second go round with
Yeah.
this guy, right? And I want to lift up what you said about your own experience too, because that's important.
Mhm.
We are in a time when he has just cut hundreds of millions of dollars of work that we do and that we support, that has proven to save people's lives and create peace and public safety. And at the same time, there is a groundswell emerging from his base.
Mhm.
Ain't just him,
Yeah.
emerging from his base to have this man pardoned for what he did. Right now, as a former prosecutor, you got to shed some light on what it mean, how the difficulty that it is involved with
Mhm.
prosecuting law enforcement.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of the biggest, baddest, bullyingest unions, set of unions in the country. All of that way, all the political facade of that, we must support our police at all costs. All of that pressure, all of that tension, that leaves, under pre-George Floyd's circumstances,
Yeah.
uh, prosecutors, judges, elected folks on the intimidated side already. I mean,
Mhm.
what does it mean to be able to genuinely prosecute somebody like that, given that armor of support
Yeah.
that hardly anyone else, unless you're a very wealthy person in this country, would have if they were on trial for their lives?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's why when I just cited those numbers of more than 1,300 people have died this last year, the year before, at the hands of police. I don't know that I've heard of any cases where a police officer was prosecuted. So if any happened last year, that it was few. So it's very rare, actually, very rare. to have a police officer prosecuted after killing someone for all the things you were just saying. I mean, it's in some ways it's asking the fox to, guard the hen
Well,
house, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's, the people who would do the prosecuting work alongside police every day. So the chances of you turning around and then being willing to use that power and authority against a partner is a hard thing to do. Now people do it. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but it is rare, and there's a lot of political wins and other things that you have to overcome to be able to do it. So the fact that it got done, that he was prosecuted, he was convicted, and to now have a president even considering rolling that back it's hard to kind of it's hard to put words to it, especially because it's clear he's not doing this because he believes he's innocent and should be released. He's not going to be released because thankfully there are state charges that will
yes,
keep him detained.
yes.
So you're only doing it to prove a point, to make a statement. And I feel like to poke the bear, you knew this anniversary was approaching, and instead of honoring George Floyd and his family and recognizing the loss, now you want to talk about pardoning his killer. That's intentional. It is intentional.
And on top of that, and they picked the right ones, and I'm including you in this number. This what he has done and is doing to this Justice Department, this weaponizing of the Justice Department and turning on its head the good work that the Justice Department was mandated to do, especially since the late '50s when it was given that broader mission of protecting people's emerging civil rights and immigrant rights
Yes.
and
Yes.
disability rights. Right?
Yes.
I'm proud to call you in the number of those warrior lawyers in our community-based violence intervention front that are suing the hell out of this man and his Justice Department to give back our money,
Yes.
right? So we can do
Yes.
our work. The money that was allocated to us and our partners before he became Mr. President again, right?
Yes.
That he really has no, authority to touch, but he's
Yes.
trying to touch every, as much as he can, hoping that all of the conservative judges that are stacked throughout the federal court system will, back him up. Tell you,
Yes.
you got to say something about where we at and why
Yes.
that lawsuit is important.
No, thank you for just bringing that up. First of all, just to share the information for folks who haven't been following this closely, what we're talking about is a month ago, literally a month ago to the day, April 22nd, more than 200 organizations, including us, received a notice at 5:30 p.m. that our grants were terminated from the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs. And as Baba Zayid was just saying, these were grants that had already been allocated, already money that's already been appropriated by Congress, money we've all been actively spending on community violence intervention and prevention efforts. And that these were efforts that DOJ, for the first time in history, was supporting. Like this putting federal dollars to these efforts as opposed to the traditional policing and prosecution is a new thing. And we were, even with it being new, already seeing results. We saw drops in violent crimes in some of the major cities as much as 70%. So these are methods and solutions that are working, and they are saving lives. And this administration came in unprecedented taking of grants that had already been allocated, more than $800 million total, 371 grants, and literally did it in a way where we couldn't access even money that was owed, that was reimbursable money. So, yes, I'm proud to say that today or late yesterday, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the more than 200 organizations that have been impacted by this illegal taking. We are hoping that we can get some justice through the courts for this. But it speaks more broadly to just the time we're in right now, when we would have an administration come in, take an office of gun violence prevention that was a first ever set up, passing through dollars, providing support for these life saving measures, immediately shut down the website. You can't even access the resources. And, among so many other
Exactly.
things, right? Like they're not just taking the money for solutions that work, that address drivers of violence, but they're also taking money from the social safety nets that, the bill just passed a bill in the House, afraid to see what's going to come out of the Senate, that is gutting Medicaid, gutting educational access, gutting SNAP, like access to food for poor families. And, so we know poverty is a driver of violence. When we put all of these things together, not only are you pouring gas on the things that light the fire of violence, you've now taken away the response that would actually help our communities stay safe. So I think we're in unprecedented times right now.
But as such, the answer to the problem and to the question is in the sauce of how we responded. Right, we had that National Day of Action. Cities all over the country did what we did. A class action lawsuit is
Yes.
a united strategy.
Yes.
Right, there have been days of action protesting this administration of a range of different kinds.
Yes.
And that is the order of the day. Malcolm and me coming, I'm leaning on that particular ancestor because he's someone you can always come to for clarity.
Mhm.
Right,
Yeah.
Malcolm taught us the importance of the united front, of building united strategies to resist oppression at its worst, right,
Yes.
and to bring out the best of humanity in how we do that.
Yes.
And so as difficult as this is, as unprecedented as this is, I'm so very proud of the children and grandchildren of my community and their friends, right?
Mhm.
And how they have been protesting against those things that matter to them and that matter to this moment. I'm proud to see the emerging coalitions that are responding to these different challenges. I'm of that age where Medicaid and all that stuff really matters, right? And
Yes.
I was on Snap just a few years ago, right? And I've had my own dance with that, and that's all over our community, right?
Yes.
All of those things, right? DEI, yeah, they scared of the dark coming to light. They're scared, but our kids and their friends learned, and they were able to put that to in the street in a way
Yes.
that was unprecedented. And I'm hoping that stream of solidarity, those
Yes.
stream of those efforts to build those united fronts continue to flow and move and grow and to do what we need them to do. And I'm certainly, with the breaths that are left in my old body, trying to breathe that kind of message and aura and warmth into as many young people as I can. And
Yes.
I supremely appreciate your example, personal and professional, right? And how you do what you do, and how we need another generation to come forward in the field,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
that. We need community based, movement based. We need a fresh generation of lawyers who do
Yes.
exactly what you do, right? Because these battles are epic, protracted battles, as the late great Kwame Ture always taught us, and we need to, prepare ourselves to be
Yes.
in it for the long haul, because that's what it's going to take.
No, thank you. I don't know if there's a better way to end than that, Baba Zayid. Just with gratitude, in spite of the challenging circumstances, we still got to fight. We don't really have a choice. We have to fight. And our people, our communities, our safety is worth fighting for. So I thank you just for being the example you are, for your leadership, just for the always bringing us back to history and reminding us none of these things are new, then that we stand on very broad shoulders and we have ancestors that we can look to. So I just thank you for all that you bring to our space at EJUSA.
And that mantra is never give up. And I thank you for your leadership. And that means the world to all of those places, all of those faces, all of those hearts, all of those human beings who we touch and we love with love. We
Yes.
thank you too. We lead
Thank
with love and we ride with grace.
you.